I wasn't supposed to be home for another 12 days. That's what made everything unfold the way it did. The trip had been planned for months. International meetings, back-to-back flights, the whole exhausting schedule. My house manager had the calendar. Security had the timeline. Even the HOA knew I'd be gone because they'd sent one of their usual reminder emails about trash bins and exterior lights while owners were away. So when my final meeting got canceled and I booked an early flight home, no one was prepared for me to pull into my own driveway at 6:40 p.m. on a Thursday. The gates were closed but unlocked. That was the first red flag. I parked and stepped out, expecting silence. Instead, I heard music, laughter, glass clinking. Not echoes, active, present sounds coming from inside my mansion. For a split second, I thought security had thrown a party. Then I saw unfamiliar cars parked neatly along the side drive. 3 of them. None registered. None authorized. I walked to the front door. My key didn't work. That's when the porch light flipped on, and a woman I'd never seen before opened the door halfway, stared at me, and said, without hesitation, "Sir, you're trespassing. I've already called the police." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just stood there, stunned, while she continued like she'd rehearsed it. "This is a private residence. You need to leave immediately." Behind her, I could see it clearly now. My furniture rearranged. My art on different walls. Shoes by the staircase that weren't mine. A suitcase sitting open in the foyer. I calmly said, "This is my house." She laughed. A sharp, dismissive laugh. "No," she said. "The homeowner is out of the country. I'm authorized to be here." Authorized. By who? Before I could ask, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the drive. 2 patrol cars. She smiled like she'd won something. "Good," she said. "You can explain it to them." When the officers approached, she didn't even let me speak first. She stepped forward, confident, indignant, already playing the role. This man showed up claiming to own the house. He tried to force entry. The officer turned to me, asked for ID. I handed it over.
Come.
Collected. Then I said, "This is my primary residence. I returned early from a business trip. I'd like to know why someone is living here." That's when her tone changed. Not panicked. Not guilty. Annoyed. She pulled out her phone and waved it slightly. "I have permission from the HOA. Temporary occupancy. House-sitting arrangement. House-sitting. For a mansion. For 2 weeks. Without my knowledge." The officers asked her how long she'd been staying there. She shrugged. "About 14 days? I watched one officer's eyebrows rise. Mine didn't move, because suddenly things were clicking into place. The unexplained utilities spike. The delayed maintenance reports. The HOA emails asking if everything was satisfactory while I was away. This wasn't random. This was planned. The officers asked for documentation. She hesitated, just long enough. Then showed them an email from the HOA, granting temporary access due to a maintenance oversight. I took a slow breath, because the HOA didn't own my house, didn't manage it, didn't have keys, didn't have any authority to put someone inside it. And yet, somehow, this woman had been living in my mansion for 2 full weeks, sleeping there, hosting people, calling the police on me when I came home early. Standing there on my own porch, surrounded by strangers and flashing lights, I realized something very important. This wasn't just trespassing. It was a crime. And the people who thought they were in control had no idea how badly they'd miscalculated. The officers asked if they could step inside. She answered before I could. "Of course," she said, already turning away from the door like she owned the place. That alone told them something was wrong. Inside, the situation unraveled fast. My living room no longer looked like my living room. Throw pillows I didn't own. Wine glasses on the coffee table. A framed photo of her on my piano, smiling, posed, like this was a vacation rental. One officer glanced at me, then back at her, clearly reassessing the story he'd been fed. They asked where she was staying. She gestured casually. "The master suite." That's when I spoke again.
Come. Precise.
I'd like to see the authorization that allows her to occupy my bedroom. Silence. The officer asked for documentation beyond the single HOA email. Lease. Contract. Anything. She scrolled her phone too long, then admitted there wasn't anything else. The HOA handled it. The officers separated us. Outside, I showed them my deed, my ID, utility bills, security access logs. Inside, they asked her who gave her the keys. She said the HOA board president personally let her in for monitoring purposes. Monitoring what, exactly, she couldn't clearly explain. Then one officer radioed in the property address. That was the moment her confidence cracked. Dispatch confirmed my name as the registered owner. No renters. No management transfer. No police report granting access. No emergency maintenance authorization. Nothing. The officers returned inside together. Ma'am, one said, firm now, you do not have legal permission to be in this residence. She immediately pivoted, started crying, said she'd been misled, claimed she thought the HOA had authority, claimed she'd been told the homeowner wouldn't return for another month. That detail mattered, because it meant someone had given her my travel timeline, which only a handful of people had. The officers asked if she'd paid anyone to stay there. She hesitated, then admitted she'd been told she could use the home temporarily in exchange for helping the HOA keep an eye on it. That crossed a line from misunderstanding into conspiracy. They asked if she'd changed the locks. She nodded. She said it like it was normal. The officers exchanged a look that needed no translation. They asked her to pack essentials and leave immediately. She protested, raised her voice, insisted she'd done nothing wrong. When that didn't work, she demanded the HOA president be called. One officer agreed. On speaker. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. Because the moment the HOA president realized law enforcement was involved, and that I was standing there, her tone shifted from confident to evasive. She tried to frame it as a caretaker arrangement. The officer stopped her mid-sentence and asked a simple question. Do you own the property?
No.
Do you manage it under contract?
No.
Do you have written authorization from the owner?
No.
That was it. The call ended. The officers informed the woman she was being removed for unlawful occupancy. Not arrested yet, but warned that charges were still possible pending further investigation. She stormed out, dragging suitcases, shouting that she'd been promised this was handled. As the last car pulled away, the officers walked back inside with me. They advised me to change locks immediately. File a formal report. Preserve emails. Preserve access logs.
Preserve everything.
One of them paused before leaving and said quietly, You should know, this kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. I already knew, because when I opened my security dashboard later that night, I saw it clearly. Access granted. Access scheduled. Access approved. By people who thought my absence gave them opportunity. And next, they were about to learn how expensive that assumption would be. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I didn't leave the house. I sat at my kitchen table with a laptop, a legal pad, and a growing sense of disbelief as the full picture started to form. First, I pulled the HOA emails. Not just the recent ones, but everything from the last 6 months. Buried among generic notices about landscaping and community standards were subtle questions that now felt anything but innocent. Will the home be vacant during your upcoming travel? Should we coordinate exterior monitoring while you're away? Please confirm your expected return date. At the time, I'd brushed them off as overreach. Now, they read like reconnaissance. Next, I accessed my smart lock history. 2 weeks of entries lit up the screen. Codes issued.
Codes used.
Times logged. Every access lined up perfectly with HOA office hours. Mid-morning. Early afternoon. Never late at night. Whoever did this wasn't sneaking around. They were operating comfortably. Confidently. I called my attorney. By noon, he was at my house, walking room to room, taking photos, documenting changes. Furniture moved. Personal items handled. Drawers opened. Wine missing from my cellar. A guest log on the counter. Handwritten, listing visitors I'd never approved. This is criminal, he said flatly. Not gray.
Not civil only.
Criminal. We filed a police report immediately, upgrading the incident from trespass to unlawful occupancy and conspiracy. The officers returned, took statements, and confirmed something that chilled me. The woman had told them she'd been assured the HOA had done this before.
Before.
That meant I wasn't the first. My attorney sent preservation letters that afternoon to the HOA, to every board member, to their management company. Any deletion of emails, logs, or messages from that point forward would be considered spoliation of evidence. The HOA president emailed me that night. Not an apology, a request. She asked if we could resolve this internally and avoid unnecessary escalation. She claimed the situation had been misunderstood and that the woman had overstayed. Overstayed. In my house. For 2 weeks. I didn't respond. Instead, my attorney filed a civil complaint the next morning naming the HOA, the board president personally, and the management company. Claims included unlawful entry, conspiracy, deprivation of property rights, and emotional distress. We also requested emergency injunctive relief to bar the HOA from any further contact with my property. That filing triggered something else. The HOA's insurance carrier. They called within hours, asked for details, asked for copies of the police report, asked whether the board had written authorization for me. They didn't. And that mattered, because intentional acts aren't covered. By the end of the week, the HOA board was in full damage control mode. Meetings canceled, emails delayed, residents whispering, a special assessment notice quietly drafted and then pulled when someone realized it would expose the situation. Meanwhile, the woman who'd been living in my mansion hired a lawyer of her own. She claimed she'd been induced to occupy the property, that she'd been told the home was under HOA control, that she'd been given keys and codes and reassured repeatedly that the owner was gone and unlikely to return early. That phrase showed up again. Unlikely. Meaning they gambled. They bet on my absence. Bet on my silence. Bet that I'd come back, be confused, maybe negotiate quietly. They didn't expect police. Didn't expect logs. Didn't expect me to push back hard. By Friday, subpoenas were being drafted. Text messages. Internal HOA chats. Access logs. Key code records. Every breadcrumb leading back to a board that thought power extended further than it did. And as the legal walls closed in, one thing became clear. This wasn't just an HOA scandal. It was about to become a public one. By the time the subpoenas went out, the HOA stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. They went quiet. No newsletters. No community update emails. No replies to residents asking why police cars had been parked outside the president's house 2 nights in a row. Silence is loud when people are scared. The first documents came back within days, and they were worse than anyone expected. Internal HOA emails showed open discussion about my travel schedule. Not speculation, confirmed dates. One board member had written, "He'll be gone at least 3 weeks. Plenty of time." Another replied, "Security won't be an issue. We've handled access." Handled access. There it was in black and white. They hadn't just allowed it. They planned it. The management company's records were just as damning. A temporary caretaker access code had been created in their system and labeled with the woman's initials. Notes attached to the entry referenced owner absence and board-approved temporary occupancy. No owner approval. No contract. No emergency. Just assumption and entitlement. When the HOA's attorney finally reviewed the evidence, he resigned. That happened on a Monday. On Tuesday, the board president tried to call me again. Left a voicemail this time. Her voice was shaky, nothing like the confident tone I'd heard on speakerphone days earlier. She said they were willing to make this right. She mentioned compensation. Asked if we could avoid court. My attorney listened to the voicemail once. Then archived it as evidence. Because by then, the criminal side had escalated. The district attorney's office contacted us midweek. They were reviewing the case for potential charges related to unlawful entry, conspiracy, and misuse of authority. The woman living in my house had already given a formal statement, one that named names. She handed over text messages from the HOA president reassuring her everything was cleared. That cooperation changed everything. Suddenly, board members were lawyering up individually. The HOA insurance carrier formally denied coverage, citing intentional misconduct. Residents received a vague notice about temporary governance disruption. Property values dipped as word spread. And then came the resignations. First, the treasurer. Then the vice president. Then 2 committee chairs. Karen held on the longest, until the county served her with notice of investigation related to unauthorized use of private property. She stepped down the same day. At an emergency community meeting, held without her, the remaining board members stood in front of a stunned audience and admitted what had happened. Not in full detail, but enough. Enough for residents to realize their HOA had crossed from annoying into criminal. Enough for anger to replace confusion. People demanded audits. Demanded answers. Demanded to know how many times the board had accessed homes for monitoring. The room got loud. The trust was gone. Meanwhile, my house was finally mine again. Locks replaced.
Codes wiped.
Security upgraded. But the violation lingered, not in the walls, but in the realization that people who claimed to protect the community had felt entitled to occupy what wasn't theirs. The courtroom was full the day the case was called. Not just lawyers and officials, but neighbors. People who wanted to see how far this would go. People who finally understood that what happened to me could have happened to any of them. The judge didn't waste time. The evidence spoke first. Emails detailing my travel schedule. Access logs showing codes created and used without authorization. Text messages promising the woman everything is cleared. Police reports documenting unlawful occupancy. There was no room left for interpretation. The HOA's remaining attorney tried to frame it as misguided stewardship. The judge shut that down immediately. Stewardship does not include occupancy, he said flatly. And authority does not arise from convenience. The ruling came in layers. First, a permanent injunction. The HOA was barred from entering, accessing, monitoring, or authorizing access to any private residence without explicit, written owner consent. Second, civil liability. The HOA and individual board members were found jointly responsible for damages. Not symbolic damages, real ones. Legal costs. Security upgrades. Loss of use. Emotional distress. Third, referrals. The judge referred the matter to the district attorney for continued criminal review of specific individuals, citing evidence of coordination and intent. The room went silent when those words landed. Karen wasn't there. Her attorney was. And his expression said everything. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. The story had leaked days earlier, and now it had teeth. HOA board authorized unauthorized occupancy of home, ran by evening. Residents demanded elections. The management company terminated its contract overnight. Within a month, the HOA was effectively dismantled, placed under temporary oversight, stripped of enforcement authority until a full audit could be completed. As for the woman who lived in my house, she settled. Quietly. Provided testimony. Returned everything she had taken. She never contacted me again. I returned to my mansion, not as a battleground, but as home. The rooms felt different for a while. Not damaged, violated. But time and reclaimed control did what it always does. The house settled.
So did I.
What stayed with me was the lesson. Power, when unchecked, looks for opportunity. Silence is often mistaken for permission. And people who believe rules apply only to others will always go too far, until someone stops them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't negotiate away accountability. I let the truth, the logs, and the law speak. And in the end, the people who called the cops on me for coming home early learned something the hard way. You don't get to live in someone else's house. And you definitely don't get to call the police on the owner.